if Treaties 8 and 11 are peace and friendship instruments, then so are Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and all the other treaties across the country. I can't speak for the other treaties because I really don't know them. Although, as my relative here, Lillian Shirt, said, I am a direct descendant of Peter Erasmus, who was a professional interpreter, translator, who translated for Treaty 6 in Fort Pitt and Fort Carleton. And so by the time that the other treaties came around, when my grandfather went north, we already knew what the whole process was to meet with other people. So it wasn't a new thing, entering into treaty for our people further north. And so without getting into too much detail, because I know you've heard a lot of discussion today, there are some points that I'd like to make so that people in Alberta are aware of some of our thoughts. Firstly, we believe that the question of ownership has to be addressed, because if these are indeed peace and friendship instruments, which the courts say they are, that was never disputed in the courts in Canada. And if the courts also say that we have the right to self-government, and the Constitution says we have these rights, the Royal Commission that spent $60 million in the 90s say we have these rights, then what's the problem? The problem is a few people in Ottawa called the Cabinet. They're not acknowledging and they're not recognizing that that our governments exist. And so we have to talk about and think about how that's going to work out, because what it really means is that there are different degrees of sovereignty. First Nations have sovereignty. You're never conquered. All over the world, the issue of land is being fought. There are civil wars. There are all kinds of fighting all over the world. We're the only people that are not holding guns in our hands. And there's a reason for that. It's because of our treaties. And so, how are we going to discuss it? If we have a degree of sovereignty, the other sovereign is Great Britain, and if they've transferred it over to Canada, then we need to understand what that means. It doesn't mean Canada is the boss of us. It was never the intent, because we never gave them that authority. And they could never ever show us on paper where they have the authority or the ownership of the tar sands or any other riches in this country. They can't show us. If you ask them, show us on paper, they can't. And that's one of the things that we're doing with the sale to the Chinese company. We're asking Canada where they got the authority to sell it to a company that's owned by another country. They don't have the authority. So we have to put a stop to that. We also have to talk about what kind of powers the provinces have, because they do have some authority. They certainly don't have the right to regulate our lands, or legislate over our lands, or legislate over us, because we never gave them that power or authority either. So that discussion is what needs to take place. And it's obvious here with the exchange we just had that until there's a debate with the people in this so-called province, and I say so-called province because, I mean, it's your territory. This is Treaty 6. Until you have this discussion in Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 and Treaty 8, you're going to continue having this fierce debate. And it's not very healthy. So we're quite open to helping you because we're downstream. We're slowly getting poisoned every day. The chemicals that you're talking about include arsenic. We don't even know what's in the water. They don't have to tell what they use when they refine the oil. So all the water comes down. It hits Lake Athabasca, Lesser Slave Lake, Great Slave Lake, Mackenzie River, Beaufort Sea, out to the rest of the world. That's why we're seeing seals with one eye now, because the arsenic from here is going all the way to the Beaufort Sea and into the circumpolar world. So Alberta is polluting the rest of the world. It's not just the north. They're polluting everyone. And I'm quite comfortable saying that. The other thing we need to talk about is these tailing ponds. Huge, huge lakes, if not with water, then dried up. And the people here, I want to thank the organizers this summer for the healing walk. When we saw that, that was incredible. I still think about that. I felt sick after that walk because we breathed in the toxic chemicals. And I wonder sometimes if Fort McMurray was where say Pinter Creek is, in the southern part of the province, and the water is coming this way. Would they do something about it? I'm sure they would, because you've got cities like Lethbridge, Red Deer, Edmonton, Calgary, downstream. But they don't do much about it because it's up north. And generally it's just our people. So it's a real issue. We need to talk about the tailings ponds. 2012, there should be no tailings ponds. There should be no poison. But the technology today, I was reading in a paper that there's more people going up to Mars. You know, if they could spend that much money to go to Mars, surely we can get the scientific knowledge together to get rid of tailings ponds. Get your best minds together. Get industry, get Alberta, get the federal government to spend some money on it. The other one is water. Our water table is dropping up north. We're being affected. And the huge amount of water that they're using in Alberta is ridiculous. Every proposal that comes forward to expand the tar sands has been approved. 100% approval. And to us, it seems like anyone that puts a proposal forward, it's going to be approved. And why is it? That's our resources they're playing with. Now Alberta and BC are fighting over the resources, right? There's always somebody fighting over our land and our resources. And we allow it to happen. We're letting it happen. So we have to be responsible. We have to get ourselves organized. There have been oil spills in Alberta here. We're very concerned because the water is coming to us going north. A pipeline only has so much life. You've got pipes here in Alberta that are in the ground that are from the 50s and the 60s. The average pipe, the life of a pipeline is maybe 25 years. What's the plan? I've never ever seen or heard of a plan on how they're going to renovate these pipelines. Every pipeline will leak. It's just a matter of time. Every pipeline will leak. And there's thousands and thousands of miles of pipe in the ground in Alberta. And this is without talking about how we're going to be compensated or how we're going to deal with that. But these are questions that need to be addressed. We need to put them on paper. They have to go to the Prime Minister's office and the Premier's office. And there has to be a plan in place because right now there's no plan. There's no plan. The plan is expand. That's all it is. But how long is that going to last? I have this book and I encourage you to buy it. It's by William Marsden, and it's called Fool's Rule: Inside the Failed Politics of Climate Change. How many people have been to the international climate change talks? Copenhagen, Poznan. Okay, you've been to those talks. It's very discouraging because all of the countries in the world go there, and they're really not serious about climate change. There's some countries that even deny that it exists. And I've seen young people there who are very concerned. And generally, young people are concerned everywhere, because I've had a chance to travel almost all over the world. They're concerned about their future, but the countries are not, they're really not going to do anything about it, even though it's obvious that the world is changing. Climate change is real. I was on a tour from Vancouver to Juneau, Alaska, where we saw a glacier this summer. And 10 years ago, they said that on every third trip they made there, it's called calving, where the ice falls off. They said on every third trip they might see it once fall off. We were in front of this glacier for about an hour, and we saw it happen 10 times. 10 times in 1 hour. So it's real. It's happening. And if we don't think it's real, then we're fooling ourselves. One of the things that we're doing is, because this Prime Minister has a majority and he thinks he can do anything, we're going to the Supreme Court of Canada. Because as I said, we've already won in the courts. The Constitution guarantees our rights. The way the country is organized is that there's a parliament, there's three arms, or three branches. There's a parliament that makes the laws. There's the executive arm, which is cabinet, which is supposed to make it work. And then there's the judicial, which is the Supreme Court of Canada, which is separate, which is supposed to make sure that the laws are enacted or interprets the laws or legislation. And one of the things that the Supreme Court can do when the government doesn't follow the laws is that they can force them. And in judgments like Delgamuukw, Canada made it very clear that if Canada didn't enact the right to self-government, for example, that and I'm not a doomsday, end of the world guy. My wife always says I'm optimistic. I'm the forever optimist. But I say Obama might assist us, because as the water is melting, as the glaciers and that are melting, the water is rising. And the small island states are disappearing. Small islands like Hawaii are going to disappear. It's a fact. It's just a matter of time. Okay? Why do we have a chance? Because Obama comes from Hawaii. Yep. That's the reason why I want him to win. Because in the end, he's not really much better than anyone else, and I really don't like to say that. Because he's got so much opposition from the oil companies and the people with the money. He's really forced to do things he doesn't want to do. But he's not going to let his island sink. Right? He's not going to let his island sink. And I really encourage you to study that, because there's this whole movement with these small island states. They're putting millions of dollars into trying to raise their islands so that they don't float away, or they don't drown, because it's happening and it's real. Climate change is real. Words, for example, like toxicity, to toxicate. Toxicate, you see, these are toxic chemicals. They agree that they're toxic. Toxicate, toxic in law means to poison. Poison, it's poisonous. That's why I say we're slowly getting poisoned. To describe the act of one who administers, but the act of the drug. I can't read my own writing. So they're drugs also. chemicals, drugs, it's toxic. See, we really have to, you're right, you hit it right on the nose. We really have to study this, because if we're slowly getting poisoned, then we need to understand what happens when people get poisoned, right? Because it affects your immune system, it affects your mental capacity, it affects you in a whole number of ways. In Yellowknife, where I live, there were 2 gold mines there, started in the 40s and they just ended about 10 years ago. And there's 237,000 tons of arsenic that they're storing underground. They're storing it underground. It doesn't take much to poison the world, you know? So these are things that we need to talk about. It's incredible once we start to understand it. Thank you.